The WRX is finally gone. Many months ago, I made a video on that same WRX with a very, very blown up engine. And I was going to make pretty much a step-by-step video of the process of flipping the car. And like with all my flip cars, I get too involved into the project to worry about filming, and I kind of just want to get it done and out the door. And so I didn't really film a whole lot about that car, unfortunately, but it's probably the most of a flip car that I've filmed yet. So we bought this 2016 WRX with a very blown up FA20. And I wanted to make this video for anybody who has blown up their FA20, or for anyone who's thinking about buying a WRX or a car with an FA20. I wanted to go over what it costs to repair a blown up FA20 if you're gonna try to do it yourself, and everything that you might encounter. Pretty much as soon as we bought the car, we had a sale lined up. A good friend of ours, we always try to do a good and honest job on all the cars that we flip, but being that it was going to a friend of ours, we really wanted to take extra care and go the extra mile and make sure that the car was, gonna be pretty much flawless for him. So I'm gonna go over in this video all the parts that we did, all the machine work that we did, and go over the cost, and hopefully this will help you out with at least making some kind of a decision if you either blew up your own FA20, blew up someone else's FA20, or if you're considering getting one of these cars. It was a 2016 base model with 90,000 miles, and we paid $5 grand for it. And that sounds like a hell of a deal. And it sounded like it at the time too. $5 grand for a 2016 WRX, and it was very, very good condition. 6-speed manual, base model with a tune on it, and some good little bolt-ons. And that sounds like there's gonna be a ton of room for some mega profit. And the car was probably worth $16,000, $17,000. But the deal we made with our friend was 15 grand. So we bought the car for 5, we were gonna sell it for 15, and at the beginning we thought we were gonna make a very, very nice profit. And we still did make a profit on the car, but not as much as we had hoped. And that's what we'll get into, some surprise expenses and some nickel and dime stuff. So when we first took the engine out, we inspected everything. And pretty much the only major damage that we could find was that it did spin a bearing. A bearing spun very bad. And I made a video actually of making a stool out of the crankshaft of this engine. And the bearing spun so bad that it welded itself to the crank. So this is only one of the sides of the bearing. The other half is stuck on that crankshaft stool, which is pretty hilarious. If you're in the Subaru community, especially if you're in the Mid-Atlantic region, you're probably familiar with the company or the guy Felix Performance, James Felix. He's a good friend of mine. And of course, we reached out to him for his opinion on this whole rebuild. And now don't quote me on this, I don't remember right off the top of my head, but I think he told me something like, if you take an FA20 to him and you need it rebuilt, like if you spun a bearing and he's gonna fix it all up for you, it's like, to do it right, he told me, in the teens of thousands, so 13, 14, 15, 16, something like that, and I kind of didn't believe him. But after doing this, I could see why he would charge that much, of course, for the parts and labor and whatnot. Don't quote me on that price, but I think that's what he told me. So we asked him what we should do about this, and he, along with a couple other people that we asked, they all said, do not rebuild the bottom end. Which is just kind of foreign to me. Obviously, if the block is totally destroyed, I get why you wouldn't want to rebuild the bottom end. But everybody is saying that these FA20s are pretty much throwaway engines, which is just surprising to me. Now, I guess it's theoretically possible to rebuild them. You would need a new crank since it spun a bearing and a new connecting rod. But everybody is saying it's so much easier to just get a new short block. And that's what the consensus was, so that's what we did. We got through Subaru an OEM short block, which included the block, the crank, pistons and rods, all assembled, front and rear main seal on. And now, of course, Felix Performance, along with other sources that we talked to, of course, they recommended, highly suggested that most, if not everything, that the oil touches, you should replace. Now, when we took this engine apart, there was metal everywhere. This was just a spun bearing, but I have a feeling that the previous owner who blew this car up, he did a 2-to-1 shift, money shifted it. I feel like with all the metal that was in the engine, this is just my hypothesis, but I feel like the oil pump failed. And that's probably what caused the spun bearing and all the metal shavings, because when we took it apart, the cams and the cam journals, they were really chewed up. And a couple other bits were really chewed up as well from lack of lubrication. And if you saw the first video that I made on this car, when I started it up, it was squeaking, which I think it was maybe the cam squeaking. It sounded horrible. So they recommended replacing a lot of stuff. Some we did and some we didn't. So we're at $2,300 just for the short block here. And we also ordered a whole engine gasket kit. And then we ordered timing chains also, just to be safe. And when all that stuff came in, we checked the old timing chains with the new ones, and there was absolutely no stretching with the old ones. So to save a little bit of cost on here, we actually sent the timing chains back, because that was quite a bit of cost, and the old chains were perfectly fine. And so, like I said, when we took it apart, we found that the cams and the cam journals were actually pretty chewed up, but they were actually savable. There's a machine shop down in Baltimore, Maryland, AHM. We actually took the cams and the journals to them, and they polished them up beautifully, and they were able to save it. And that was $140 for machine work. And since there was no damage to the cylinder heads, we just had this machine shop clean up the cylinder heads and check for flatness, check everything, make sure everything was good. And that came out to $100. So for all the machine work that we had done, it was $240 for the cams, the journals, checking the heads, and cleaning the heads. Since everything on this engine is hydraulic controlled and there was metal shavings everywhere, it was highly, highly advised that we replace the cam gears. Felix Performance gave us a good price on them, and even still, after my buddy discount from him, it was still $1,000 for all 4 cam gears. There's really no way to know if those old cam gears were bad, but just because they're so intricate, you do not want to risk any metal shaving contamination, so it's best to just replace it. Don't even risk it, just get new cam gears. So that's what we did. And it was a bit expensive, but I did not want to, cheap out on that $1,000 and then sell this car to a friend and have it blow up immediately. This was a big expense too, the oil pump. So the oil pump on the FA20 isn't really serviceable. At least with the researching that we did, we couldn't find just a replacement oil pump. It's the entire front timing chain cover, which really frustrating, and I guess I understand wanting to replace the whole thing because there are oil galleys in there and passageways and everything, and once again, you don't want to risk contamination from all those metal shavings. So it was $500 for a new oil pump, which was also the front timing cover. So that was a big chunk of change too, which kicked us in the gut. This guy right here, the oil filter housing and oil cooler. I tried to clean it the best that I could. It's pretty intricate in there, and there's plenty of places for metal shavings to hide. I flushed it and flushed it and flushed it, and after about 10 or 15 minutes of cleaning it, I just didn't trust it. I didn't want this thing to be full of metal shavings and destroy the engine when it started back up. So in good faith, I bought a new one for my friend, and a new oil cooler OEM was $156. Of course, we put new spark plugs in it, which that was $51 also. Does make sense to put 90,000 mile spark plugs back in it while the engine's out, so we put new spark plugs in it. The engine gasket kit that we got did not come with gaskets for the exhaust, like the J-pipe and all that stuff, so we did have to buy new exhaust gaskets, and that was around $50. And it's not on my list here for this car, but it used a lot of RTV. Assembling this thing, we pretty much used a whole caulk gun tube. Maybe not a whole tube, but we used a ton of caulk. I would say probably half of a caulk gun tube that we used. And so if you were to go out and buy a new tube, that's about $30 in RTV. Another thing that we ran into that didn't cost a ton of money, but did take up a good chunk of time. Since we sent these cylinder heads out to the machine shop to get cleaned, we took off the fuel rails and the fuel injectors. And upon doing so, removing the injectors, we tore the seals for those direct injectors. And we bought a new seal kit, and you wouldn't think you would need a special tool to install seals, but you do. So we went through probably $30 or $40, I think. I think we probably went through about $50 in seals for these injectors, and we had to buy like a $20 special tool to install the seals, and that was a quite interesting experience. So between, you know, $70 and $80 all said and done for the seals and tools for the injectors. That was another surprise expense. So all in all, for this flip, between the purchase of the car, tax, title, and tag, rebuilding the engine, the machine work, all that good stuff, we're right at about $10,300. $5,000 in parts, plus all the time and labor and, you know, silicone and oil to do this rebuild. I can see where a performance shop could get, you know, to be over $10,000 or more to rebuild this if you were to take it to them. I could totally see why it's so expensive. But what blows my mind is you think of Subarus not really being that expensive, and you would think a Mini Cooper or a BMW being really expensive. But Brad and I, we've kind of become experts at, you know, fixing and flipping Mini Coopers. And when a Mini Cooper has the same issue that this, you know, WRX had, we can fix that Mini Cooper for under $1,000. We can totally rebuild, including machine work. We can fix a Mini Cooper's engine for $1,000 or less, whereas this Subaru, 5 times the cost, is just crazy to me. If you are in an unfortunate situation where you blew up your FA20, or you're thinking about getting one of these WRXs and building it and risking blowing it up, that's what you can look to spend if you're going to fix this yourself. You're gonna spend at least $5,000 to fix this. Now, you can be a baller, and instead of going with an OEM Subaru short block, you can get an IAG bottom end and spend, you know, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 on that, depending on what you want to do. But if you're in this situation and you throw a bearing in your FA20, expect to spend $5,000 just to fix it if you're going to do it yourself. Now that I've done it, I know better, but one thing that really irritated me with assembling this engine is I'm used to Toyotas, but assembling this engine and following the factory service manual just drove me absolutely nuts. The manual does not go in order, at least the manual that we had. For example, in the manual, it tells you to apply silicone RTV to the cylinder head, put the girdle on, install the hardware, and torque it to spec in this order. And then a few steps later it goes, but before you do that, make sure you put this filter here. So after you torqued it and RTV'd it, you take it back apart, install the filter, put new RTV on it, and retorque it. And the manual does that for a lot of sections. For some reason, it does not go in order, which just boiled my blood. Now that we've done it, we kind of know, and we know what to look for, but I got rid of my Subaru for a reason, and I don't think I want to get another one. Even though I did enjoy driving this car, it's probably been my favorite flip car that we've ever done, but it just rubbed me the wrong way. So if you have a Subaru FA20 or you know someone who does, I hope this video is helpful in helping you make a decision of some sort. So if you come across on Marketplace, Facebook, whatever, a blown up FA20 WRX and the person is asking $6,000 or $7,000 for the car or more, and you plan on fixing it, it might not be worth it if you have to drop $5,000 into it, where you could just buy a non-blown up WRX for the same amount of money. So food for thought there. Use this information to make whatever decision you need to make. So hope you guys learned something, hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Oh, and check out the video where I turned the crankshaft of this engine into a stool. It's probably the most useful a Subaru crankshaft has ever been. See ya.